Okay. Before I get started, I'm going to try to use a PowerPoint tonight. I want to go back to trying to teach like a teacher used to do. And so I built my program on a PowerPoint. Now it's not completely mine. I have to give credit to Ross. Wednesday, Ross triggered something in me. And so he and I have been going back and forth and jousting. And I think what I have is a compilation of the two of us using thoughts that I've had. Now, this is a PowerPoint. It's not a movie, so I'm going to be reading some, but I'm going to show you some maps and some pictures that came straight from the internet, and they will help you as they helped me, as Ross helped me, and as I helped Ross go through this and put together what I really believe, and I've always really believed it, but I couldn't prove it. So therefore I just taught the old way, which was last week. So I'm going to teach you something that I really think is important and appropriate. So right here. Okay, here we are. So this is my screen. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to revisit the Exodus. And I'll go a little farther than we did last time, but I want you to understand that the first thing I want you to look at, there it is Exodus 17, 1-5. So I wrote it down for you. Well, it's actually Exodus 18. I don't know why I put 17. Yeah, because this is the beginning of the section. It begins by saying, Jethro, the minister of Midian, the father-in-law of Moses, heard everything that God did to Moses and to Israel, his people, that Hashem had taken Israel out of Egypt. Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, took Zipporah, his wife of Moses, after she had been sent away, and her two sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, for he said, I was a sojourner in the land, and the name of the other was Eliezer, for the God of my father came to my aid, and he saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. Now Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, came to Moses with his sons and his wife in the wilderness where he encamped by the mountain of God. Now that's important because there's a lot of key information that's going to be found in just these verses. As we go through our study, I want you to understand that the Bible is not written in such a way that you can just simply go through sentence by sentence and be able to historically map what's going on. We're going to be going back and forth. I'll go back to Exodus, the 2nd chapter. I'll go on to Numbers, the 33rd chapter. So this broadcast that I'm giving you is probably my understanding at this moment, and that's the key, at this moment. And there's going to be more that we're going to learn. In fact, if you begin to dig into this material and you find something new, I'm hoping you'll share it with me. Now, for those who are on my study buddies, I send you out a script every week so that you have an idea of what I'm going to tell you. And oftentimes I'm not able to share everything verbally because of the fact that I still try to save time for you people to talk and for you to think about what's going on. And so tonight I'm going to, again, try to keep it at about 40 minutes so that you have a chance to ask questions, because you're going to see maps that you have never seen before. I can guarantee you that. So you're going to be seeing lots of things that you have not seen. Okay? So please, as we go along, if there's something you want to ask, raise your hand right away so we can stop, correct, or verify what it is that you're thinking. That is important to this whole discussion. So now back to the story. Okay, so they begin this process. Notice he's called the chieftain of Midian. Even as a chieftain, Jethro really held no power within the community. As a chieftain, he was a priest. He had priestly powers. And by priestly powers, that meant he understood the gods of Midian. But it should be also understood by the Midrash, he also knew the gods of every other nation. He was what you would call an entrepreneur. He could talk about any group of gods that you would want to talk about. But as far as being a chief, he wasn't. In fact, his daughters were treated disrespectfully. And you remember that when they were down at the well, and it was Moses who had to intervene in order to get them water for their animals. So when we begin to think of chieftain, don't think of somebody who is totally in charge. Now it says he heard all that God had done for Moses. Now the question is, how could he have heard? Well, the first idea is the fact that he heard through caravans, people talking. The second thought is the fact that, again, when the sea split, according to the Midrashic writings, the waters not only split at this Red Sea crossing, they also split all the water across the world. All bodies of water split. Now that's another way. Now, if that would have happened, you can imagine how many conversations must have been going on trying to figure out what on earth actually happened. So that was another thing. But we notice that he takes them out of Egypt and he appears before Jethro, or Jethro appears before him. The question then becomes, where did that happen? Now, according to our story, Jethro and Moses are gathering in the wilderness while he's encamped near the mountain of God. Near the mountain of God. Okay, here's another map, and this map is closer to the way I explained it last week, except that the red line runs on the west side or the east side of the Gulf of Suez, but actually it should have gone on the west side at this point in time. See if I can highlight for you. It should have gone from here around and down. That would have been it. Whoops, got to a slide too quick. It should have gone around that side. Now, if you're following this map, which is the traditional Christian map, you will notice that Mount Sinai and Rephidim are located in the Sinai Peninsula. And he goes up the north side, up north along the Gulf of Aqaba, and you can see that the loop is routed around and around. Literally, in most maps, there's several loops. It's almost like a figure eight. It's almost like a motocross. You're crossing your paths over and over again. And that is what really makes things frustrating, which is what we're going to find when we get to Numbers chapter 33. And you begin to go through a list of the places that they passed. Now, it's not the complete list, but it's enough to get you confused as to where he's at. So I wanted to give you this perspective on what's going on. So the body of water that we're going to talk about tonight is not the Gulf of Suez. It's the Gulf of Aqaba. That's the important body of water. Now, both of those bodies are called gulfs, which is nothing more than a bay. They literally are both part of the Red Sea. So please, when the Bible uses the term Red Sea, it does not use the Gulf of Suez. In fact, the Gulf of Suez didn't exist as a gulf by name until 1946. That's when it became the name of that place. The Gulf of Aqaba also did not have the name Gulf of Aqaba. It was known more as Elot because it went all the way up to the city of Elot, or what we today call Eilat. So those two bodies of water are both part of the Red Sea. So when we talk about crossing the Red Sea, we are talking about crossing the Gulf of Aqaba. They would have gone from where it says Ramesses to Sukkot. From there, you would have followed it along until you came to the Gulf of Aqaba. That's the way they show it. That's not right. First off, I live in Texas now. In Texas, there's a city called Palestine. Palestine is also in Illinois. I can't tell you how many other states have the name Palestine. So when I look at the word Sukkot there, I have to understand that might be the Sukkot we're talking about, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's just a name of a place. So as we're going along, I want you to understand this. When we look at the Sinai, we need to account for another group of people besides the Egyptians. We need to account for the Edomites. The Edomites owned a territory also. The territory that they owned, if you look at the map on the side, you can see where Moab is, and you can see that blood red. That's the area of Edom. That's the area they controlled. Now you'll notice that area also infringes on the Sinai. So when Egypt says that they own the Sinai and Edom says they own the Sinai, you know that there were some confrontations between the two. In fact, in the book of Jasher, which is another Midrashic book, they talk about the wars between the two. So this area is in dispute at this point in time. Now, as we're going along then, we have to understand another thing about this, that Edom is to be known to be an area of what today is called the Negev. And it's roughly southern Israel and Jordan and going on all the way down, all the way to the Red Sea. All of that's included in that. Now, the Red Sea at Elot, which is at the top of that gulf, that's where Solomon built his ships that he used for trading. He was not the first person to use that port for trading. David was. As King David was growing financially, he began to send ships and people, merchants, to various places along the Mediterranean, creating what we would call outposts for the purposes of establishing trade and collecting more money. Also in that area, if you want to look at it from the Gulf of Aqaba up, all the way to just about where you see the bottom of the Dead Sea. From there on over to the Philistia area would have been another trade route where where David would have built another. It is called Ashdod. And that became a seaport, and that began to send out trade. So you can see that this area is very, very active in terms of what was going on there. Now, we also know that Moses was a Jew. And we know that the Edomites really did not like the Jews. So when Moses fled, he fled from Egypt, he did not stop in the Sinai because that was still controlled by either Egypt or Eden. So the only place he could have gone to meet with Jethro would have been on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba. That was the territory known as the Libyan or Median territory. Okay? Now, having said that, so what's in a name? I think we need to go back to the time when Moses lived with Jethro in the land of the Midianites for more understanding, but there's also something else we need to know. If you look at Exodus chapter 3, verse 2, in fact, why don't you turn back there just so you have the whole verse and you have the whole idea of what's going on there. This is during the time when Moses was going to meet on the mountain. Well, actually, for the burning bush. So in this particular section in chapter 2, chapter 3, he begins by saying, Moses was shepherding the sheep of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. He guided the sheep far into the wilderness. Now, again, another thing we're going to have to watch out for is what constitutes a wilderness. In other words, there are going to be multiple places that are going to be identified, 6 of them in the whole section. But many of those are the same place. And many of them are identified being in 3 different places. So it's very difficult to go by the understanding. And I'm not sure whether the God was not trying to confuse us, but I got the feeling that there was more to the story that would have given us a better set of directions than what he gave us. He's very brief on what he's going to tell us. But notice it says he guided the sheep far into the wilderness, and he arrived at the mountain of God towards Horeb. So now we have to understand, what was the mountain of God? There was only one mountain that was identified as being the mountain of God in all of the Torah, and that was Mount Sinai. That's where he rested. So I believe firmly that what we're looking at then is going to be on the Saudi side of the Gulf of Aqaba. That's where it's going to be, because Moses would not have felt safe anywhere but there. Now, I want you to also look at that same section, and I want you to look at the burning bush. So you're continue on in verse number 2, okay? The angel of Hashem appeared to him in a blaze of fire amid the bush. Now he saw, and behold, the bush was burning, and the fire, but the bush was not consumed. Moses thought, I will turn aside now and look at the great sight. And why? Whoops. Screen sharing stopped. Okay, let me try it again. Here we go. It's good to see you all, though. All right. What happened? Now I'm frozen out. See if I shut it. I'm sorry, it's new technology, right? I'm trying to do something different. There I am, but I got the other side in there, so I have to, well, I'll leave it there for the time being. You can browse ahead if you'd like. But what we're going to look at is the bush. Now, in our story then, we're in the wilderness. The wilderness is called Ha-Midbar. Ha is the word the. Midbar is the word for wilderness. When we read the book of Numbers in Hebrew, we're reading the Midbar. We're reading the stories in the wilderness. Now, this is where I want you to notice. The word for bush is sneh. Samek nun hey. Now, we're going to be near, and we're going to talk about the wilderness of sin, because that's where the story's really taking place, is in the wilderness of sin, which is called Midbar Sin. Now, if you look at my description, I will have the word sin, Samek, Yud, Nun. Nun is Safit. It's the end in Nun, not in the beginning, because if you go to the word above it, Nun is the bent letter. So it's Sin Midbar. And this is in Numbers 33, 11, and 12. Notice the similarity between Sneh and sin. Also there, we're going to talk about the wilderness of Sinai, which in Hebrew is Sini. Sini. Again, Samek, Yud, Nun, and now we've added another letter. We've added the Yud again. Notice the root. A root is a 2 or 3 letter. That's the basis by which words are created. Notice how sin or Samek and Nun are appearing in our words. Now there's another wilderness you're going to see, and it's called the wilderness of Zin. Now it's not called the wilderness of Zin if you speak Ashkenazic or Mizrahi. Then it's called the wilderness of Sin, because the Sadi makes an S sound. So there's going to be 2 times we're going to find it that way, and it's in Numbers 13:21 and Numbers 20, verse 1. So you understand what we're looking at is Palestine. Another way of looking at the same place using 3 different references, all coming from the same root, all coming from the bush, all leading us to the same place. Make sense? Okay. So we've gotten to this point of understanding. Let's see, I've got that up. Go to the next one. Now we're going to talk about leaving the Egypt. They're trapped in the sea, at the sea. It's a 3-day journey to Mara. From there, it's down to Rephidim. That's where Moses and Jethro are going to meet. Not far from there is going to be Matan Torah. That's where the Torah is actually given. And there's 2 mountains that are identified as possibilities. The first one is called Jabal al-Lawz. Lawz is not what we think of as laws. Lawz is almonds. So this is the center of almonds, which goes along with remember the staff that was thrown down and turned, remember in the story with Korach, the dealing with the almond branch, which one budded? That's what it's talking to. The other is probably more likely, Jabal Maklah. That's probably Mount Sinai. Now, the reason that they come with that conclusion is because we know what happened when Moses went up the mountain, what was happening at the top of the mountain. Do you remember? The mountain was on fire. Now, as we go through, you will see pictures of the Sinai area, and you notice the stone. It's brown, brackish in color. But the top of Jabal is black. It's burnt. We're also going to find another place where this burning took place, and that's as they're ready to cross the sea. When God brings the fire down behind Moses and Israel in order to keep the Egyptians from catching them. And we'll see there the same thing. Okay. Here now, this is my map. This is the map that I want you to see. This, I can't take credit for all this. This is Ross's work. All those pinpoints on there are places identified in the Bible as a part of the 40-day experience or 40-year experience, right? They're going to go from somewhere up by the Bitter Lakes up in Egypt, and they're going to go down, and they'll go all the way to where it talks about Solomon's Pillar. Solomon's Pillar was put there by none other than Solomon. He put one on that side. He put one on the opposite shore. The reason was identified not on this side because the water had washed away most of the Hebrew language that had been written on it. And remember, the Hebrew language back in those days was not like what we read today. It was a pictograph. So the pictograph, the pictures themselves were lost. And you'll see that because of the discoloration that went on this side versus what's going on the other side. And then that one will have all of the writings, basic words that could be understood and put into sentences. But for our point in time, this is where the event is going to take place. This is where it is. So here's the Red Sea. The pillar of fire by night came between the army of Pharaoh and his Hebrews. That'll be back here. The angel caused a great eastward wind and blew, and they crossed over there. You'll notice that there's a green area that shows the camp of Israel. There's the Migdal, which is a tower or could be a fortress of some sort. But that's the place where the Egyptians were coming from. So you get a picture of what's going on there. Now, it shows it going straight across. Again, if the Bible is correct, they didn't cross, they went around and back out. Purpose was for them simply to cause the Egyptians to go into the water. They would have gone north to Aqaba and then back down again. Now, what's missing in our picture is the Mara, the lake of bitter water. If you're in, the season that they're in is spring, rainy season. So in other words, what would be dry wadis 9 months out of the year were now filled with water, and they were draining into what would have been a pond or a lake of some sort. They stopped at that lake and tried to drink the water, but it was alkaline. It was water that was not palatable. They just couldn't handle it. So at that point in time, remember, Moses, in order to make it drinkable, cast the tree into the water, sweetened the water. They were able to drink it, and they moved further south past the Solomon's Pillars, right down to Rephidim. Can you see that? Can you follow that map? Okay, so that's where it's at. So let me show you. This is the point of crossing. Pi Hahirit Hariyot. This is the shoreline. The Jews would have walked down this path out into this area. That would have been where they would have stood, waiting for the sea and the turbulence to end and for them to jump into the water. That's where that would have happened. Further back would have been the fire. And that part, can you see on the side of the mountains? Can you see the dark sand? That's the crystalline effect of fire on the sand. That's what's gone on there. So as you're walking in your path, you're down to the sea. Fire is back here, keeping the Egyptians at bay while you begin to cross to the opposite shore. Now, according to my thinking, if the Bible is correct that they walked out, around, and back in again, they would have walked down that beach area all the way around to the opposite shore. That would have been where the second pillar was. Here you go. This picture shows you two pillars. Ron Wyatt was one of those who has been there before. And so he created this for me. You cannot get to these pillars yet today. Now, the darker pillar is the pillar on the west side. That's the pillar that was pretty much destroyed by weathering and everything else. Now, the lighter pillar which is on the other side where the people are standing, that's the one that is still readable at this point in time. And on that, you will find words like Mitzrayim, Solomon, Edom, death, Pharaoh, Moses, Yahweh, indicating that King Solomon had set these posts or these pillars as a memorial for the crossing. Saudi Arabia does not admit tourists to this area anymore, probably fearing something going to happen, changing the Bible or whatever have you. But understand, in the Qumran, they too have the Exodus. Moses is one of their greatest prophets. That's hard for us to understand, but he is one of the great ones. Also with him is Muhammad and Jesus Christ. Those are the three greatest prophets because they spoke to God directly. So I leave it at that point. But as you're looking at it, this is a pillar that was established by Solomon. The one on the east side is basically worn out. The one on the west side still held. And if you're not in the picture now, but what would become part of that picture later on would have actually been a fence, a chain link fence that was all around that entire area, keeping you from actually going out there to see what's there. And that's not uncommon. That will happen in multiple other sites. The Saudis have sawed them off so you cannot get to them. So let's go back to the map before. Okay. In this map, notice Solomon's pillar, either they did cross or they went around. Either case, they're going to end up, the first place on the other side is at Mara, then down to Rephidim. Now, Rephidim is a significant place. Well, actually, I got this out of order. No, this will work. Elim is a little bit lower on the scale. So let me get it all in here. 3 other places I need for you to understand. The very bottom of the map, you will see what's called Moses' well. And you'll see what's called Jethro's hood. Moses' well was the well that he contended with the Midianites for Zipporah and her sisters. Not far away, you'll find cliff dwellings, just like you would find at Petra. You know, have you ever seen the cliff dwellings at Petra, where they built a fascia on the side of the rock? That's what Jethro's hood looks like. It's his own version of a Petra. So that would have been where he's at. So now you know where Moses actually went to. Now, when it says he went to the edge of the wilderness and met with God, that's the question of which of the Jabals did he actually go to? And for that, you would go further out towards what I'd say would be towards the golden calf altar that's in this picture. Okay, that's the place he would have gone to. So as we're going through and understanding, Mary just raised her hand. Go ahead, Mary.
Could you use your pointer on some of this?
I would like to, but I lost my pointer. I only got my finger and I keep pointing, but you people can't see me. So I'm having some difficulties. Can you see can you see my arrow?
I can see it. Yeah, you're down towards the bottom of the map.
I'm at Moses' well.
Right.
Can you see that, Mary?
Yes, that's what I wanted you to use as your little
Okay. All right. So look, we go again. Solomon's pillar. Either they went straight across or they went. I'm really screwing up. They either went straight across or they went around the gulf and back down to where Solomon's pillar is again, to Mara, which is not on the map because Mara doesn't exist year round. So there's no way to identify that. Rephidim is recognizable. Remember, that's the water that he drags from the rock. Remember how he splits the rock and creates the water? That's this one. Now, as you can see from this comes out of Exodus chapter 17, where Moses is told to strike the rock. Okay, this is the place where he's striking it, is up at the top. Okay? But look at the middle, which is why I wanted to save this picture. Do you see what's here? That's an altar made out of stones, not cut, nothing is done to them. They're just simply stacked stones that the altar was built on. So in this particular case, this is the altar Moses would have used as he was honoring God for the water. Does that make sense to you? Okay, that's what's going on. What's not in the picture and further over would have been a picture of the pen where they would have kept the animals that they would have been using for the sacrifices. Carting all those animals across, the Levites were already providing animals all the way through the wilderness. So that's where they're grabbing their animals from at this point in time. So this is the splitting of the rock. Eventually it's going to be called Miriam's well, because this flowing water will travel with them across the wilderness. But it's here where we begin that process. So that's why he's got this particular thing showing. So let's go back. So Rephidim is the splitting of the rock. Moses' altar is just south of that. Further south is where Moses would have started from when he went back to Egypt, where Jethro lived. Can you see how close it was for Jethro to get to Moses? Do you see the shortness of that trip? That's the important thing to get the idea of, because we have the idea that he went way out into the middle out here near number 50 in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula. He did not. He met him right there. In fact, over in this area, which is where between the two number 55s is St. Catherine's Monastery. I don't know if you remember St. Catherine's Monastery. That's the monastery that's most people, well, it was made in about the 6th century and it's still filled with monks today. They believe that was Mount Sinai. So they built their monastery on top of that mountain. Well, again, no, that's not where it's at. It's over on the other side. And this is what we're looking at as we go through. I should have found another picture, a better picture, but that's the one I've got right now. Yeah. Okay, so here's Jethro's hood down here. If you can remember the map before. Here's Jethro's hood. It's down in this little valley area. Okay. Now, here it is again. Here again, this is where the altars are. This is where Moses or Jethro would have gone up the road to meet with Moses right in here. Does that make sense to you? Can you see what I'm talking about? Okay, so this is the story that we're getting to. Here's the split rock. Here's Rephidim. There's the altar that was there that I showed you. Jabal Lawz is right here, and over a little bit further, you would have found the area that was that. Bobby, you got a question?
Yes, so this is the altar that Jethro would have used
Jethro, yes,
for his offerings.
correct.
Okay. I just wondered if they didn't have another one for a Gentile.
No,
Okay.
nope, they used the same altar, and that's the interesting point, because again, the food that was used there was actually the food that sustained them when they went up to the 70 elders and went up onto the mountainside. So it's a rather interesting point. You're absolutely correct in thinking that, which again, kosher has not yet started. So therefore, they're still working under the old system. So the altar is the altar at this particular point in time. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Now we passed Elim, but I did not highlight Elim on there. Elim is the place where they had the 70 palm trees and the 12 springs of water. You remember when they left Mara, they had to go another 3-4 days down, and they found themselves in the middle of 70 palm trees and 12 springs of water. This is the area that was highlighted as being in the wilderness that represented, or was at that point in time, supposedly that. There's more than 70 trees there, but there are only 12 wells. Okay. Now the question is, there's plenty of room all around it. Two understandings. First off, if you had 3 to 6 million people and you tried to use those 12 wells, how long would it take you to get a bucket of water? The understanding is God raised the water out of the wells and literally flooded the area, causing them to have multiple places where they could get water. Not everybody standing there. Ross and I were talking today about the sheer numbers of 3 million or 2 million. The places that we looked at. Imagine 2 million people, 3 million people standing there. So it's difficult to understand unless God shrunk them, made them so much smaller so that they could all be in the same place, which he did, if you remember, when they all went to Jerusalem for the festival of Sukkot. Everybody in Israel was to show up. Imagine how many people that would have been. And not only that, they all fit in the temple square, the temple grounds. Imagine how crowded it was. Then imagine when they had to prostrate themselves during the festival. How could they have done it? Only God can create that kind of a miracle. I have no idea, unless he passed out sissy straws to everybody so that they could all drink the water at the same time. So here's our area that we're talking about. Notice the terrain is not the kind of terrain that you would normally think of when the millions of people are traveling through the wilderness. There was no way that they could travel, as I originally had heard, where they kept the camp exactly as it was, and they all moved forward from that point. 3 tribes to the north, 3 tribes to the south, 3 to the east, and 3 to the west, and the tabernacle parts were in the middle, and they pushed through there. Now, it says in the Midrashic writings that God simply flattened all the land to allow them to travel in that manner. So that's the only thing that you've got to work with for that particular point of view. Okay, I've now taken you through all of my slides that I have. I could have had more, but to be honest, by the time I really started working on this was, we spent the morning talking and frustrated, got through the morning, and then in the afternoon, for the last 5 hours, I was putting together these 14 slides just to give you an idea. Now, if you're interested, I gave to my study buddies on Sunday a copy of this story, what I've covered here, in somewhat the same detail. I also included with it the understanding of how China and Israel fit together, because it comes out of the same story.